Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Empowering Teachers. Today, I have a two-part series for you, and the story is that I've been accumulating these stories to talk about the impact that our profession is going through right now. This is part one of why so many teachers are leaving, and in part two, I will talk about why others stay. So, over the past years, the internet has been full of stories of teachers leaving teaching. A recent NEA survey revealed that 55% of current employed teachers are seriously thinking about leaving their jobs, and that number is even higher for teachers of color. These numbers have spiked sharply over the 23-24 school year. In August of 23, only 37% of those surveys said that they were thinking about leaving. Even more alarming, more teachers than ever are breaking their contracts and leaving in the middle of the school year, a decision many thought they would never make. It is no exaggeration to say that a big shift has occurred, and it happened very, very recently. If you are in a leadership position, a school administrator, a district superintendent, or even an official at the state level, and you're concerned about this shift, we should definitely should be. I'm hoping to offer something helpful here. We'll start with the story of four teachers who recently made the decision to leave their jobs and finding the common threads between them. These are the cautionary tales, the ones from which we can learn what not to do. Think of this part as how to lose a teacher in one school year or less. And in part two, it will be about teachers who stayed and the administrative decisions that made this possible. For this section, I will look specifically for teachers who stayed because of administrative support. At this point in history, I refuse to gaslight teachers into doing it for the kids or being some kind of heroes for mankind. We are so beyond that. The reality is, teaching can be satisfying, sustain, it can be a satisfying, sustainable career if and only if policies are put in place to make it so. The policies are possible and they are being put in place in small pockets all over the country. All it takes is to make it happen are brave, insightful leaders who set their egos aside and stand up for what is right. Those are the people who are keeping their teachers. And my goal here is to spell out exactly what they're doing to make it happen. So here's a story. I've changed the name of the teacher so that just for privacy's sake. Jamie's story is about blatant disregard for safety. Jamie was an English teacher and a librarian in a southern state who taught for about 8 years before leaving. Like most teachers, she understood that the job was going to be challenging, and she was prepared for that. Teaching is never a profession that you enter thinking this will be easy, she says. You know that you're in it for the kids, you know that you're in it to build a better world, you know that you're in it to pay it forward. And there were always moments where I thought about other professions, but there was never trouble like the brutality of the treatment by our own leadership in the pandemic. Like schools all over the world, Jamie's school went full remote in March of 2020, and everyone did the best that they could. But when they returned to in person in August 2020, teachers were concerned about a lack of cleaning supplies, poor ventilation, and inadequate masking. Meanwhile, public support for teachers was quickly eroding. Small groups of vocal parents attended school board meetings demanding full time in person learning and elimination of mask mandates, calling teachers lazy for wanting to continue teaching from home. Teachers who pushed back on those demands were called bullies and hecklers, and even by the school board members themselves. In the spring of 2021, the new availability of vaccines kept Jamie's hopes up. Despite being exhausted every day from covering extra classes for quarantine colleagues and all the other associated tasks, she still felt optimistic. When the Delta variant arrived, that optimism vanished. Rather than reinstate safety measures, her school districts went the other direction, completely ending mask mandates and adding to that of the removal of any quarantining. When you're not even pretending to try to keep the students in your care safe, she says, I couldn't do it anymore. When asked how administrators could stop the flood of teachers leaving the profession, Jamie said, give teachers a voice. Teachers need seats at the table where all decisions are being made. Every school board should have a teacher who is elected. Every school board should have a student who is elected. The bus drivers, the cafeteria workers, there are so many people in the everyday life of school, the people who have to answer the front desk who's arguing with people about masks, the bus drivers who have to hand masks to kids every day. There's so many people that need seats at the table. Another person, her name is Denise, an art teacher in a private school on the West Coast. Denise used to love her job. It was amazing, and it was amazing for a real long time, she said. I love being a space where kids could come and just take a breather for a minute, seeing kids create and using a different part of their brain. For a long time, things were great. And even at the beginning of COVID lockdowns, things were tolerable. At the beginning, everyone was like, yeah, teachers are the best. You got all these Starbucks gift cards, and people were really nice. And then it just flipped really quickly. The biggest thing that pushed me out of teaching were, I'm going to call it what it was: abuse from parents, abusive language, harassment. I had a coworker who had 7 emails from a parent between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. demanding things. I mean, this is a person who's like literally asleep in those hours. I had parents throw in my face how much they paid for their students' education, and therefore I work for them, and I should be responding faster. Rather than advocate for the teachers, Denise's administrators often acquiesced to parents. She described a culture where parents were more or less in charge, and the school leadership bent over backwards to please them for fear of having them go elsewhere. This atmosphere, along with the increased demand from COVID, meant more and more demands placed on teachers. Although self care was giving lip service, very little was done to make it possible. There was no opportunity for self care for teachers, she said. It was like the pandemic didn't exist and we were expected to act like everything was normal. Along with these issues, Denise found herself increasingly disappointed by her school's weak efforts towards equity work. Although the schools had what Denise called a glowing diversity statements on its website, she found that their actions didn't really align with it. She would attend trainings and come back to her school full of energy, only to find very few people wanting to get on board. Folks are kind of like, well, that's cool. Yeah, yeah. We'll talk about it later. And I'm like, no, we've got to talk about this now. And summer of 2020, things spiked again and then kind of became like trendy. And then it sort of went away. And I wanted to keep having these conversations and talk about why do kids get misgendered? Why do we not have bathroom for all folks? Why is our school not disability accessible? And why are students of color not being understood by how many things that they have to do to make it here in our school? And no one really wanted to talk about it. Despite her drive to make things better for her students and to be the best teacher for them, the burnout eventually took her down. You want to make things better, she says. I think all teachers want to do that, but at some point, you have to say, okay, but what is the result of this? I am burned out. I am grumpy. I'm tired. I'm not treating my partner super great. I'm angry. I had told myself that I never wanted to be that grumpy high school teacher that I had because that was such a turnoff for me as a student. And I told myself that if I ever started to feel that way, that I should leave. And because it wasn't fair to my students. So these are stories of teachers that are really into it. And all they want to do is that they want to do their job. You know, all of these teachers, most of them have stated the same message. The last teacher finally said, I got to a point where I thought, I'm a mess emotionally. I'm worried about getting COVID. I'm stressed to the max. The raises that they give me doesn't match what everything is rising. I can't do my job in the hours that I'm being paid for. It affected my relationship with my husband. It affected my relationship with my own children. It affected my mental health. I would come in every morning and wipe mouse urine off my computer before I started for my day. What other job is that acceptable? But we have a shortage of custodians. We have a shortage of teachers. We have a shortage of aid. So you just do it and you move on. And you think, wow, that really sucks. This sucks. This is my life. But then there just comes a day when you're like, I don't want to do this for my life anymore. I want a better life for myself. These are stories of teachers who really came in gun ho about teaching, and yet, because of outside circumstances, they have taken the love of teaching away. Well, we can do better. We must do better. And in my next episode, I will talk about stories of teachers who stayed, why they stay, and why they continue to keep the flame alive. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll join me for part two. Continue to be the amazing educator that you are.